What is up, everybody? This is episode 16 of the Model Mindset. I am Brian. We, as always, have John. Today's a very special day because we have Laurie Singer on today. And Laurie is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a board-certified behavior analyst, author of the You're Not Crazy, Living with Anxiety, Obsessions, and Fetishes. And by the way, it is a fantastic book. Both John and I read it front to back. And also, what piqued our interest with Laurie is her fitness journey. So Laurie, in 2017, was inducted into the Ventura County Hall of Fame, and she's a 3-time Ironman competitor, which we will definitely go into that. So Laurie.
So welcome, Laurie. Thank you.
Welcome to the Model Mindset.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Awesome. Absolutely. So Laurie, if you could, because our listeners probably are not familiar with your backstory and your journey, if you could kind of just tell us all about your life and what led you to being a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Well, I actually had no intention of going to college or furthering my education. It was when my son was diagnosed with cancer and he passed away at the age of 2. He was diagnosed and passed away 2.5 months later. So it was a very fast cancer. And I was running at the time, and the local college asked me to come and run cross country for them, which I did not want to do. Well, first of all, I was still grieving over my son, but I was a horrible student in school. I was never diagnosed with ADHD and a learning disability. So I barely graduated high school, and to go back to school is just frightening. But the head coach was very persistent and wanted me to run for the college. So I did it. And what I found was that I used the same skills in training for a race, and I applied them to studying. And for the first time in my life, I actually felt confident about studying and about my grades. I ended up graduating the junior college at valedictorian and then attending UCLA. And then, now I have my own practice and I wrote a book. It just, to me, it's amazing. Awesome. Because I would have never expected it. I had very low self-esteem as far as my study habits in school, and didn't really feel good about myself that way.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, and we wanted to touch on that today too, as far as, how you feel taking care of your physical health correlates with taking care of your mental health, and kind of how those things balance in one another. So right away, you touching on that is really eye-opening to us for sure. So with now, you, like you said, you graduated from college, you wrote a book and all that. Kind of what went into writing the book, and kind of the discoveries you made along the way with the information you have inside the book?
Well, I have these case studies that are in the book. And so I knew I wanted to put case studies in there. And I wanted to pick some of the most difficult cases that I had, and then also make one that wasn't so difficult. Well, they're all difficult as far as overcoming some type of a fear. But as you know, you can read that there's one in there that's conversion disorder, where the anxiety was so bad that they weren't able to walk and in a wheelchair, because these are real stories. They really happened.
Yeah.
But I think the most difficult part was how much of myself I was going to reveal, because I wanted the reader to know that I myself experienced anxiety and panic attacks. And so I thought, how much of myself am I going to share? Because it is a self-help book, but at the same time, I think it's helpful for the reader to know, oh, she understands because she went through something like this. So that was actually the most difficult part.
That's interesting.
And Laurie, you touch on something as well as kind of revealing your upbringing, and you do that right at the very beginning of the book. And so John and I, we both have kids. I have a 3-year-old and I have a 1-year-old. They're both boys. And John has 2 young girls. And as soon as your book started, it was very emotional for me, because I can't think about losing any of my sons. And I'm sure John can't think about losing his daughters.
Right. Yep.
How did you heal from that? And was that almost is the healing process what led you to becoming a licensed therapist?
Yes. So I think, it was all so quick when my son was diagnosed. We thought he had an ear infection because he was crying and crying. And so I brought him to the doctor and they said, oh, he has an ear infection. And I brought him home and I thought, this is not an ear infection. Something is wrong with my son. You have that innate feeling that something isn't right. What we didn't know at the time is that he had a tumor in his stomach that was actually crushing his spine. Can you imagine how painful? And
my God.
I know. So the tumor was crushing his spine and we didn't know it, but I knew something was wrong. Things were happening so fast. We could barely get him to lay down for an MRI. And then by the time we got home from the MRI, they said, your son has cancer. He has to go back to the hospital. And then by the time we got him back to the hospital, they said, well, he'll probably have a year to live. And I learned how to work whatever it was to feed him through the IV. And we got him home that night. The cancer had already gone up his spine to his brain and he was going blind the next day. So that's how things happened. So we really didn't have time. We were very fortunate to have my husband's family, his mother and father were very close to us and they really helped. And my dad was always just right there for us. I also, so weird. I brought my jump rope with me because my husband and I had to live at the hospital. And when I say live at the hospital back then, we were in wards. So no parent had their own room. You were in a room with like 4 other kids who were in the hospital beds with cancer and their parents are with them. And you weren't allowed to spend the night. Now things are much different at Children's Hospital. You have a room, they encourage the parents to stay. Back then it was much different. But my husband and I would sneak in the bathroom and then we would get the other parents and we would come back in to be with our kids and the nurses would just let us stay because they knew that it was us. But during the day, I would go out on the balcony and while other parents and some nurses were smoking cigarettes, I would stand there and jump rope. And so I would jump rope for an hour, then I'd go back in again and then go back out again. So we try to maintain some sort of, it's not normal. It's not a normalcy. I don't know what it is, just. That's the word I would use. Yeah.
But was it almost like your outlet just to kind of have some sort of sense of, I just need some sort of time to myself to kind of process what's going on. Yes. And now for you, that was jump roping.
That was jump roping. Or sometimes I would be able to drive to, where the Hollywood Hills sign is. You see it in movies. The Children's Hospital is very close to that. So I would go there and run in the mountains there and then come back to the hospital. And then then we have a 5-year-old. What do we do with her? Because all of a sudden, your whole life is turned upside down. So she would come and visit, and that kind of goes into how the children's playroom was developed. And I don't know if you want to talk about that now or if you want
to. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please. Yeah.
So when Jackie used to come and visit Jacob and her mother and father who lived at the hospital, there was nothing for her to do. There was like a Mr. Potato Head with one eye and a nose. There was no toys. On the whole floor, on the whole cancer floor for all the kids, back in the day, they had VCRs and there was only like 3 VCR machines and there was nothing. Nothing for these kids. So after Jacob passed away, the running community was there for me and they wanted to do a run in his name. And we got together with 2 other individuals and they said, let's not make it a race, Laurie, because once you make it a race, you have to involve the police. You have to, get the permits. You have to do that. Let's just make it a fun run, no timing, and people can give what they want to give. And I said, that's a great idea. And let's give it all to the cancer floor where the kids are to buy them toys. So that's how amazing. It started. And then 10 years later, Children's Hospital contacted me. They said, hey, all these checks are coming in your son's name. And I thought I was in trouble because I was using their logo on a shirt. And so now I'm really going to get it. But we worked together and from that money that was donated, they got other people that would donate even more money. And the Child Life program was started. It was started just from that run. So it's pretty amazing because the Child Life program is an area where the kids with cancer, it's a doctor-free zone, and the siblings can go there. There's computers, there's toys, there's dolls, there's therapists that help the children, like the siblings. Let's say it was around for Jackie. They would be there for Jackie to help her process her brother going to pass away, and they would be there. So it's just an incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And
that's awesome.
And the way I see that and hear that, it's, I think the grief of losing someone, you always think of like how much more life they had to live, no matter how old they are, right? That's how you process it. They had so much more to do. And in your case, your son was so young and obviously had his entire life ahead of him. But with this, what his life has provided everybody up until this point is so immense that I feel personally that would help my healing process personally. That would make me have some sense of, pride and all that in his name and stuff like that. So that's incredible. That's what you guys have been able to provide and take such a horrible thing and make it such a positive, and have such, great things come of it. Kudos to you, because that's incredible.
Well, John, I have to say that, interesting, because some people just don't know what to say and they end up saying the wrong thing, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. But my advice to people is just tell people you're sorry. What can I do when I'm sorry? But some people would say, like, well, it's God's will. That's what he wanted. And I would say, well, have you been to the cancer floor on a children's hospital? Because I don't think that was God's will.
No.
And I do believe in a higher power, but I don't believe in children suffering. I do now, looking back at it, I have to say that his short life, like you said, John, had so much purpose. How we've been able to help all these families through their suffering is just amazing. And the line of work that I got into, I would have never done this. I would have never helped all these people. So
and can you go into that, Laurie? So from that, how did you start? Did you all of a sudden see that other families were going through some similar situations and they didn't have maybe a support system that you had, and it almost drew you to, okay, how can I kind of get into that space, if you will, or that profession to help people through these tough times? Is that kind of what drew you to that?
That's actually almost exactly what happened, Brian.
Oh, okay, all right.
Nailed it. You nailed it, BG.
Yeah. I read the book.
When we were in the hospital, we were fortunate, like I said, that we had a close family. And I saw other families and other cultures who tend to blame themselves or each other for a sick child. And I felt so bad for those families. And I thought, if I could just help those families or at least the child. And I would, when Jacob was well enough, which didn't happen very often, but I could put him in a wheelchair and wheel him outside on the sidewalk just to get some fresh air outside the hospital. And some people wouldn't even look at him. They wouldn't look at me and they wouldn't look at him because, here's a sick kid in a wheelchair. He's obviously really, really sick.
Why do you think that is, though? Why do you think people didn't want to kind of acknowledge that?
I think they don't know how to respond. And so it's just very hurtful. And so it was hurtful to me. And I know that because I don't know if you know this, but I have a contract with our county where we work with developmentally delayed individuals. So we work with individuals who are Down syndrome, developmentally delayed, autistic, cerebral palsy, seizure disorders. And so it's really treating them like a human being. And so when I saw that walking my son, and when I saw the other families being torn apart, I did feel a need. How can I give back to these families in some way? But at the same time, I was a horrible student, so I never thought anything would come of it. And so it's weird how life has these, I don't know if it's a plan, but
just
doubt.
Well, you know what's crazy too, Laurie? It sounds like you originally had some limiting beliefs that were falsely there, that maybe was doubting your intelligence, but then through this traumatic experience, it almost like drew you to force you to almost rediscover yourself, that you are smart enough, and that you can do this because you proved it, and you're making an incredible difference in the world.
Yeah.
I think it's twofold because the experience itself, you can empathize with people on a different level. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Just like, when you had your kids, you couldn't really relate to your parents, but then you had your own kids, like, oh, now I know how they felt, right?
Right.
So you have a better understanding. And that's the same when you have a child that passed away or that had to go through a horrible experience. You can empathize with a parent of a child that has a disability. When Jacob first, when they said, first they thought he had spinal meningitis, before they saw the tumor. And I'm like, oh, okay, a wheelchair. That's fine. We can play basketball in a wheelchair. That's not a big deal. And then it's, well, now he only has a year to live. Well, now he's, now you have to make a choice of whether he's going to live or die tonight. That was another decision we had to make, which was
awful. God.
How do you process all that? Like between you and your husband, I mean, after that, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot.
It is a lot. And the thing was like when I told you earlier that we took him home and they said, okay, he'll have about a year to live. And then we're like, oh, great. We get a year with him. Isn't that wonderful? We're just going to enjoy every minute. And the next day he wakes up and he's gone blind and they take him away in an ambulance. And I'm like, this is not supposed to be happening. They said we had a year. So we get to the hospital and they said, the cancer's gone to his brain. We have to put him on a respirator. It's up to you. And I said, well, wait a second. This is not supposed to be happening. We need to talk to somebody at Children's Hospital. And, my husband and I are in the other room and we said, we can't watch Jacob go through any more suffering for it was horrible what he went through in that short period of time. And so we said, we made our decision and they said, you took too long. He's on the respirator. And so
that's unbelievable.
Yeah,
I know. Just what else could go wrong? I mean,
exactly.
One thing after the next. I mean, to have to make that decision and then you made it. And now your son is going to be flown back to Children's Hospital in ICU for 2 weeks until he passes away. I mean,
yeah. And I can empathize with that too. So my father actually in 2017 was diagnosed with gallbladder cancer, stage 4, kind of out of nowhere. He thought he pulled a muscle in his back. Long story short, and when he went to the doctor, his blood work came back and it told him that he was ill. And this was in May, maybe around Memorial Day. And I remember I was at work and I got a phone call from my mom after one of his visits. And it was the phone call to tell, and she was calling all three of us, me and my 2 sisters, that he had 5 years. The doctors gave him 5 years.
Okay.
And at that point, so that enough was a shock, right? 5 years, you think that's such a small amount of time compared to what you went through. It's nothing, And then by the middle of July, he was gone, and it just progressed. It was really strong. It was kind of just unrelenting to him. Same thing, I remember. I was over at my parents' house with my wife and my daughter at the time, who was just under 1. And we went there to visit and say hi and stuff. And I got home and maybe 3 hours later, my mom called me to go back to the house and my dad was having a really, really hard time. We had to call the ambulance and that was the last time he was ever in the house. And it was just things happen so fast and you can't process it fast enough. You're kind of just okay, you're following the doctor's leads or whoever's giving you the information, but you don't have time to process it. And it makes the grieving process a hell of a lot longer too, because you can't process things in the moment, So I can certainly empathize with what you're saying there, because the speed things can happen sometimes can cause a ton of stress on someone.
A horrible turn, and you're like, well, wait a second, that's not what you said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. You gave me 5 years, and now he's, like you said, on a respirator. Now I can't talk to him anymore. Now you're telling me that I have 24 hours. I have to come to the hospital to say goodbye today. it's waves and waves of bad news and emotions, and it certainly takes its toll on people. So the way you were able to kind of catapult that into wanting to help others is admirable, because not everyone can crawl themselves ahead of that spot of depression and grief, you know?
Right.
Well, I actually didn't deal with the grief until about 10 years later.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
really?
it did take that long. It did. Okay.
Yeah, so I pushed through it, and I wanted to stay. I mean, granted, I would cry at the drop of a hat, but I tried to power through it. You know, I really did. I didn't want to. I wanted to try and be there for my daughter and, you know, my husband, but I didn't process the grief. And there really wasn't therapists to help us at the time. There wasn't like, well, you know, you should really go to this group and it would be beneficial to your family and your daughter. There was nothing like that. So I kind of did it through running to get through the motions. And when I went to graduate school is when I really had my first panic attack, because like in the book, it says, you know, if you go to 10 hours of therapy, we'll count that as 100 hours towards your 3,000 clinical hours that you have to get. Yeah. So I said, oh, sign me up.
No brainer. Yeah.
So I get to the therapy session and she says, so tell me a little bit about yourself. And I said, oh, you know, my mom was an alcoholic, a drug addict. She left our family when I was 10. And then I had a son who died of cancer. And then I had miscarried twins. And then I decided, you know, to go to the graduate program. And just explaining it to her.
Just like it was nothing.
Yeah, like no.
I remember you saying that in your book, how like blanket statement your things were that you were talking to her about. I remember reading that. Yeah.
Like it was a grocery list, you know?
Yep,
and so she looked at me and she said, wow, you know, you've really been through a lot. And I thought, well, I guess I have. And then she started making me realize how much I actually have gone through. And that's when I started to get the panic attacks. That was the beginning of me recognizing what actually had gone on in my life.
Yeah. So do you think if you never had that conversation that maybe you wouldn't have discovered those panic attacks, or they would have come on and shown themselves in a different way down the road?
I think eventually, and this is what I tell other clients that come to see me, I say eventually it would have caught up with me, like it'll eventually catch up with them. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of time before you can try and stay above it, but it's like a river chasing you or something. Mm-hmm. Eventually it's going to catch up.
So was it just a lot of the emotions that were come flooding back to you, or thoughts that made it hard to deal with? Yeah. Okay.
So I really pushed, who wants to remember their mom and dad, where their mom is trying to beat up the dad, and then your mom is in the middle of the street laying under the tires of the car while your dad's trying to drive away to get his kids out of the house. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't want to remember that. And, you know, it was just all of these memories that I had not dealt with. And I think too, I never thought I would ever have a relationship with my mother, and I didn't want anything to do with her because she didn't want anything to do with us until her husband died. And then she needed her kids who she had abandoned. And so I made a decision. I had to make a decision. You make a choice. Are you going to be there for her or are you not? And I realized at that time, thank goodness I had gone through some schooling and therapy, and we're all human beings and we all make mistakes. And my mom made a huge mistake that she had to take with her to the day she died. Every time I saw my mom, the first thing she would say is, "You hate me, don't you?" That would be always, "You hate me, don't you?" And I was like, "I don't hate you. Mm-hmm. This is where we're at." What do you say to somebody?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm sorry, BG, go ahead, man.
I was going to say, were you able to let go of any resentment or like hate? Because I'm assuming that you had to at some point in order for you to kind of have that relationship again established with your mom.
I actually felt sorry for my mom because I know what she missed. She missed having a mother-daughter relationship. She was addicted to drugs and alcohol. That's was more important to her than her kids. And that is sad. And it really was that way up until the day she died. When I first got back into her life and I would bring my kids to see her, I would take her out to lunch and she would be downing like 4 Greyhounds at 11 in the morning. And I said, okay, we can't do this anymore because I don't want to be out in public with you. And this isn't healthy for my kids. So I would end up coming to her house and we would bring lunch there. And that's how we would visit. It's what a sad way to live your life. It's just a waste.
Yeah.
It's a waste. But, then I think back about her childhood, and she was born in Germany during World War II. My grandfather had to buy his way out of Germany with diamonds on a boat to Cuba to live there so they wouldn't get thrown in concentration camps. So this is how they survived. And her childhood was where she had to hide everything. They couldn't show the neighbors anything. It was, so I don't know.
So she had scars too from childhood, and she was probably coping it with the alcohol and running away.
Yeah.
So Laurie, I'd like to go into, how you developed and implemented your behavioral and cognitive behavioral methods. Because how did you understand that it could translate to a vast majority of disorders?
So what happened was when I was seeing this therapist in graduate school and I started to have these panic attacks, I couldn't drive on the freeway. I'm like, are you kidding me? Now what do I do? And so in her office, which is in most cases with therapists, they'll say, let's practice some techniques, and they'll have you breathe in the office. And that's a clinical setting, and you're out in the real world, and then you're like, now what do I do? I didn't practice, and now I'm having a panic attack. I'm not in her office, though, so I can't breathe. And so I took that breathing, and I also used what I was using during graduate school. I was doing some work with foster kids, and it was something about running around the bases, go to first base, second base. And I thought, what if I use that premise of a signal plan with the breathing? So when I'm driving, I will see the, red means stop. Okay, stop whatever you're thinking, Laurie. Just stop what you're thinking. Yellow, make a choice. I'm going to make a choice. I can get through this. I'm going to do my deep breathing. Just go on the freeway. So I was using self-talk. Plus I was using the visual of a signal. And it was so effective that once I opened my practice, I started using it with my clients, and even in undergraduate classes, I would use it with my clients, and I would make by hand these signal cards with a shot glass. I would circle around red, yellow, green, and I use the cognitive behavioral therapy is changing your thoughts, those irrational negative thoughts, the what if statements that seem to cycle around in your head. How do we stop those thoughts and get you to focus on something positive and do some deep breathing? Well, I thought you have to practice. You have to practice like in a race. Everything comes back to my training. The schooling.
Same with us, so we love it.
Yeah.
So I make my clients accountable. I give them a binder, and the binder is the weekly chart where they have to practice reading the motivational story, practice the signal plan, because you can't sign up for a 10K and not practice. You can't just show up on the race day and say, okay, I'm ready to run. That's like what they were telling me in the office. Let's practice our breathing, and then when you have a panic attack, you'll be ready. No, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You have to almost train for the panic attack in a way, but replacing it, training, learning how to identify your emotions. What does it look like and feel like when you're becoming anxious? Do you become fidgety? Do you get sweaty? Does your heart start to beat fast? Once you start to identify it, then you can put the visual part of red stop. Okay, wait a second. I'm starting to take getting shallow breathing or tightness in my chest. I need to stop. I need to make a choice and remember, I'm working on myself. I can do this. I'm going to take a deep breath. I know I can do it. And the more times that you do it, the more confident you get in yourself. It's empowering, and you're able to do it. So the cognitive behavioral part is learning your emotions, identifying them. The behavioral part is how do we change our environment to change our behavior? And that's with the visual aids, the signal plan, the motivational story, the checklist, all of that.
The toolkit.
The toolkit, that's right.
Yep. Yeah. And I found the toolkit to be very interesting because when I was reading it, I'm like, all right, well, it seems like you're trying to hit a lot of the senses in a person too. So you know what I mean? You're talking about what they see visually, but also things they can touch and have substance to, right? And I thought, okay, maybe that's the point of the toolkit and some of the things that are in the toolkit, right? The story, the families creating, helping create the story for the individual. Okay, so they can hear that and they can digest that, through hearing it and stuff. So I was like, okay, well, she's hitting a lot of the senses, which makes sense to me as a reader when I was reading it. So I found that to be like incredibly interesting. With these methods now, okay, we're a few years removed, but we're still dealing with the pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic. Okay, have you seen an uptick in these disorders with anxiety, or whether it's any other kind of disorders? Has there been an uptick in that since the pandemic has started and kind of, as maybe people call it, finishing now, but obviously we're still in it in some ways?
Yes, tremendously. And I want to touch base on that, but Brian, I don't think I answered your question about different disorders and how this not one form, but this type of therapy can be used for different disorders, right? It can be used for depression. It can be used for overeating. It can be used for a whole bunch of different diagnoses. And it's because you tailor it to the person. So the diagnosis somewhat is important, but the treatment will be the same, but it might be a little more, like if it's ADHD, maybe the structure, I have whiteboards Monday through Sunday. I have, other visuals that might be used more for the ADHD person that's suffering from depression because they can't stay on topic. They're failing their classes, whatever it might be. So you can use it for any disorder. And you may have to have medication along with it too. I don't know. It just depends. With the pandemic, just to tell you, I have a 78-year-old client who came in today. She's a skin picker, and she's gotten much better. But today she said, "Oh, I'm just so anxious." And I said, "Well, what's going on?" And she goes, "Well, it's the masks again. I don't know, should I be wearing the mask? Shouldn't wear the mask? I don't want to get sick." So she's still feeling the effects from that. Just today it happened. And it's different. I have seen a lot more body dysmorphic disorder in young teens and young adults because you remember now, they spent 2 years on social media.
That's a good point.
They spent 2 years only online, taking pictures of themselves, different angles. They don't like the way their body looks. So a lot more body dysmorphic disorder. And then also younger kids from the age of about 7 to 12, more anxiety because their parents are anxious. They come in as a family and the parent is so anxiety ridden about that we can't see our friends and we have to isolate and we have to do this. And so the kids pick up on that. They can sense it. And so now they have this anxiety, and it's just it's a mess.
And Laurie, that leads me to another question that you actually just hit on. So John and I are huge fans of Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is huge into epigenetics. And so he talks about how kids are basically programmed from ages 0 to 7. And so I'm curious, because you just kind of alluded to, if a parent is anxious, especially around like the pandemic stuff, the kids will pick up on that. Do you notice with like a lot of these disorders, I'll focus more on depression and anxiety because that seems to be more of like the societal disorders that are pretty prevalent right now. Are those also programmed from, say, parents to kids?
I think there's a correlation. I think it could be, they may be predisposed to it, but maybe environmentally something set them off. Perhaps if there wasn't the pandemic, they would be able to socialize more and develop those social skills. You have to remember now, these kids who haven't been socialized, they lack 2 years of social skills with their peers that are taken away from them, that they have to relearn or learn how to now fit into their group, especially if you have individuals or children that have no siblings. They're really isolated.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think parents are mindful enough of how their behavior affects everyone in the house. It's a domino effect, and it's everybody in the house. But sometimes when they come to see me, I have to write a separate plan just for the parent and then one for the child. And I think the one in the book with the conversion disorder, you notice that the mother was a skin picker. I think I told you about that, which all of these are true. The mom was a skin picker, and then she came to thinking about it. She thought, oh my gosh, my sister's a skin picker too. So she's thinking about all these things and not really putting the pieces together. This mom was very relieved when I gave her something to do for her child that had the conversion disorder, because a lot of the parents will just enable the kids, if it's depression and they don't feel like getting out, maybe they'll just let them stay in the house. They think, well, they're playing, at least they have friends online, they're gaming. And I say, well, they're not really friends. They've never met them in person. It's different to have a friendship. We have that intimacy with somebody versus a game where you're gaming with somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, honestly, I appreciate you bringing up that, parents need to be more aware of how they are around their kids, because I myself, I think since learning and really diving into, belief system and programming, especially your work as well, that it's changed me as a parent. It's also impacted my wife as well. We're more aware of our actions, especially what we say. We're very good. We don't fight in front of our kids, but we're very aware of what we say. We're very aware of any kind of habits, so that hopefully our boys see that we're a very loving culture family. But I could totally see where kids can pick up some negative habits and behaviors of what their parents are doing, especially due to the pandemic.
Yeah, it's like a learned behavior. A lot of this can be a learned behavior, even if you're predisposed. If you have this predisposition to maybe, being non-social, as a parent, if you know that that's something you experience, you are aware of it. So you will teach your child how to socialize and, get them together with friends and have play dates. So the fact that you're aware is key, because a lot of the parents aren't. A lot of the parents I see aren't, and they're not aware of their behavior and how it's affecting their kids.
Yeah. And you mentioned the whole social media thing and how, kids spent 2 years on social media and doing these things, but also young parents and young families did too. And 100%. I feel like that probably impacts kids now too, where, I myself, I'm 33. I'm a young parent. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, right? I've had social media the entire time that, my kids have been around and all that. But I feel like maybe, it's not so much our kids we have to worry about on social media. It's ourselves and kind of how we pass that through to our kids and how our values have become shaped through social media and stuff. And that's important to not, pass it on to our kids, because, like we've talked about in the past, Brian, like that 0 to 6, 0 to 7 age, it's almost like kids just have the record button hit, and they're just recording everything that they're hearing and seeing the whole time, and that's what's programming them as young children.
And I also think, I have some parents that come in and I say, well, how often is he allowed to go on electronics? Mm-hmm. He just goes on it. Their answer is, he probably spends too much time. So they don't even know how much time. Mm-hmm. And I said, right. Well, don't you think that the electronics should be like a reward, or they have to do their homework, do their chores, and then they're only allowed so much time on the electronics. But then they don't want to go through, because they've waited. And it doesn't mean that you can't change behavior, but the longer you engage in a behavior, the harder it is to change. So you have a parent coming in with a 12-year-old, and all of a sudden they're going to tell their 12-year-old, oh, we're going to block this on your phone, and you can only go on your electronics certain times of the day. Of course, they're going to get pushback. And sometimes the parents just think it's easier to say, oh, forget it. Just let them go on it. It's not going to hurt them.
Yeah. And we did an episode maybe like a month ago on parenthood, actually. And one of the topics we talked about at the very end, and we kind of try to have some takeaways at the end of the episodes of what we talked about. And the main takeaway we took from that episode was, in our conversation, was don't chase gifts and like physical things with your kids. Chase moments and memories. And, we talked about that quite a bit towards the end of the episode. And you're absolutely right. Tablets and phones and video games, it's so prevalent in the kids' lives now. If you don't have a hold on that, then you're just setting them up for some issues down the road as far as how they're able to process feelings and emotions and connections with people. And they don't know how to do those things,
Yeah.
Well, you go to a restaurant and you see like a whole family will be on their phone.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great example.
Yeah, I mean, you go in there and you're sitting in a restaurant and everybody's on their phone. I don't get it. And I remember, a few years ago, a parent came in and she said, well, my daughter just spends way too much time on the phone. And then the daughter says, well, look at you. You're always playing that Candy Crush. And the mom's like, yeah, I do. And well, you're setting the example. What do you expect?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a great point.
It is.
And I hope our listeners are really absorbing that, the parents that, even myself, I have a rule of my, a very simple rule where I put down the phone as soon as I pick up the boys from daycare, and I'm present with the boys for at least 15 minutes. Now it sounds like 15 minutes. You don't have, but a lot of times that stupid phone gets in the way. Like if we hear a text, and it's like 15 minutes. It's 15 minutes. I'm with my boys.
But you're training your brain though. That's what you're doing in that 15 minutes. So 15 minutes turns into an hour, turns into the rest of the night. You know what I mean? And that's what that is.
Yeah, it's now longer. Now it's habitual. Now it's where I put the phone down, face down, and we play. Yeah, and it's amazing. And now every night, even in the morning, they say, "Daddy, let's fight." That's what he calls wrestling. So I'm not fighting my son. Let me clarify that. But it's amazing. It's amazing, and we have that connection.
And that's why I stopped wearing that iPhone watch, is because I was too connected. I couldn't take it anymore. That's
a good point.
There was an email. There was this. So I went back to the old-fashioned watch. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. They are stylish, though. They are stylish.
And they're great with fitness too. But So you did mention a few times in here skin pickers and stuff like that, some disorders that maybe aren't as prevalent or people may not know a lot about here, okay? And one of the things going through your book and some of the disorders and stuff that you listed in your book and talked about the case studies and all that were eye-opening for me. I've never maybe heard of some or didn't know they were as,
common,
well-known or common and stuff like that, right? So, in your journey now, were any of these disorders, when they were presented to you for the first time, shocking? Did you ever find any of them and kind of go like, wow, how do I handle this? Or were any of them kind of caught you off guard at any point?
Gosh, I have seen and heard so much throughout the years that I hardly find anything shocking anymore. Sometimes it's disturbing, it's disturbing to me when a child is being physically abusive to their parent. That's very disturbing, and it's wrong, and we have to call APS. But it happens more than you think, and I feel so bad for the parent who has gotten themselves into a situation like that because I don't know why. I mean, I think they might feel sorry for the child, or think that I don't know why, but it's not okay.
Yeah.
It's never okay for your child to put their hands on you or to threaten you in any way. Just like it's not okay for the parent to do that. It's not okay for the child to do that. And so you read the chapter, I don't know if you did, but the chapter, the fetishes in there as well.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, people come to me and it's interesting because they'll say to me, am I the worst case you've ever seen? They'll say, am I the worst case? And I'm like, not even close.
Yeah. That one, there's a specific case study in there that was definitely eye-opening as far as one of the fetishes went. Where,
Yes.
Where
we won't go into detail on it,
but it's eye-opening, and these are things that you're hearing and having to help people with, right? And you're trying to navigate how their mind is working and why they are doing those things and where it stemmed from and how you can, move forward with your method and the way you kind of roll things out to them. So it's just, there's so much, it's such a wide variety of disorders or fetishes or whatever like that you have to encounter. It's really mind blowing to me how much ground you cover.
It is. And that's why when you had said, Brian, the different types of disorders, I have had some where, I don't practice. I don't work with couples. I don't want to do couple therapy. I like family dynamics. I like family therapy, but couples therapy, I don't want to do it. And that's for somebody else. So I would refer somebody to somebody else. If there was something, drug and alcohol, I'm working with somebody right now who just stopped drinking. And I told this individual, I am not a drug and alcohol rehab counselor, but we can apply the techniques if you feel comfortable. If not, you should go to somebody else. He's been 11 days sober now, so we'll take that as a positive.
That's awesome.
We'll see how that goes. But I will tell somebody if I think that typically it's the person's not invested. They really don't. They want a magic wand. I don't have a magic wand. Right. You have to do the work. There's no easy way. There's just no easy way. I can help you. I can write you a plan. I'll be there with you when you go through the process, but I can't do it for you. You have to do it yourself. And sometimes they need medication because the OCD is so anxiety ridden, or they're so rigid on their OCD that they may need that. And what I tell them is, if they're really adamant about not taking medication, I'll say, let's give it a try first. We'll see how it goes. If it doesn't work, let's try the medication. And then once you get grounded, we can see if you can start to fade back on it.
And it's funny because you mentioned some of those, not to cut you off, BG, but
no, you're good.
You mentioned some of those, the next question I was going to ask you, which was about roadblocks and kind of maybe some of the roadblocks you encounter with your clients. When I was reading the book, and a lot of it had to do with, in part 4, you talked about a lot of families working together, them being part of the process and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, are there times where maybe the individual isn't totally honest and fully open about what's happening in their lives and their disorder? Are there certain roadblocks like that you encounter where you need to have your people open up fully? If it maybe their family is there and they're embarrassed, or they're not doing the work, like you said, they want a magic wand. How do you handle those roadblocks with your clients?
That happens a lot. So, not a lot, but it happens. And so what I do then is, let's say the family's coming in and there's a number of reasons why it doesn't work sometimes, but let's say they're coming in for the 10-year-old daughter. And the focus is on the daughter because she's non-compliant. She won't do her homework. She throws tantrums. Okay. So now we have a plan. And for some reason, it's starting to work and then it doesn't work. And what I found is I'll say to the parents, why don't you two come in and let's leave the daughter at home. And then I will say, I think that the focus so long has been on the daughter, and you've had an unhappy marriage for so long, that now that the daughter's getting better, you have to actually focus on your relationship, which isn't. So they will sometimes sabotage, which is unfortunate for their daughter, right? Or the child.
Right.
Sabotage so that they don't have to focus on their relationship, or they just continue to have a horrible relationship and the whole family knows it. The kids can sense it. But the daughter will get better. And then sometimes the kids will say to me, why can't my mom and dad do this when I did it? So they get it, what's happening, what's going on.
Yeah.
And Laurie, that's interesting that you say it like that, because I was going to ask about the support system when the support system isn't there for your client. And you just kind of alluded to it, kind of made me think of like a spouse. Like if a spouse is trying to work on healing their disorder, yet the other spouse is not being supportive. Have you noticed that can lead to separations and like really understanding like, okay, this marriage isn't working. So,
Well, I'm pretty upfront with my, I call it as I see it when they're in my office. I'm in my office, so I'm looking at these empty seats. But, if that's the case, I would like, if it was you, Brian, that was resistant and didn't want to, I would just say, why aren't you following the plan? What is it about this that you don't like? What can we change, or what can I change to get you to run it? And then you might say, well, I just don't believe in it. I don't think it would work. Well, you don't know, you haven't tried. There's something else that's stopping you. And until you can figure that out, then this isn't going to work. So you need to figure out what's going on with you. And if you want to have a private session and talk alone without your family, we can do that.
do you find men are more resistant? Because I feel like there's a very societal norm pressed upon men at a very early age when we're boys, when we can't show weakness, we can't cry, we can't basically talk about our emotions. So do you find that it's difficult to get men to open up, and it takes some time to really have them let their guard down and I would say peel back the layers?
I think I don't want to generalize, and I've seen it flipped before, but I think sometimes it's hard for the males to come in and even be a part of the session. I mean, they aren't even invested in that. But you have to remember too that a lot of times their family or child has tried other therapies. They've blown money already. Who knows how much money they've spent and time. And so they may not be fully invested at first. But once they see that things are changing, and that's what I tell the spouse, whether it's male or female, they say, my husband or wife, they're just not on board. Okay, let's forget about him for now. Let's focus on you and the child, or you and the other 3 kids, whatever it is. And then through osmosis, they may start to change a little. And typically that is what happens. They will start to, once they see it and they go, oh, I guess this stuff really does work. Okay, well, maybe I'll try some of it. And so they do. That's typically
That's awesome.
That is. That's awesome. So we did want to touch a little bit on your fitness too. Okay.
Absolutely. Because we're huge at fitness.
It is. Okay. So not to have a horrible transition there, but I do want to make sure we cover it here. Okay. So you're an Ironman competitor 3 times, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And inducted into the 2017 Ventura County Hall of Fame.
Right.
Okay. All right. So Ironman competitions now. Okay. What goes into that? How did you when was your first one maybe, and what's the training like that goes into that? Because that's just incredible to do something like that.
The training's insane.
What made you want to do that, by the way?
Yeah.
Instead of like running a marathon?
Because I've already ran, I ran 100 marathons or over 100 marathons.
Oh, wow.
So then I thought, it's what's next. And I'd done triathlons. I'd always done the sprint courses or the half marathons. And it was when I just got my license. So my practice was just starting. So I wasn't working as much as I am now, although I'm trying to cut back. And so I was able to put into the time to train. And I think my kids were probably off to college. I don't know where they were. I'm sure they were gone out of the house. So I had the time. I had the time to train for it. And I've also done a couple 100-mile runs and a bunch of 50-mile runs and things like that. But I have to say the training for the Ironman was harder than training for a 100-mile run, because you have the 3 different events that you have to train for. You have the swimming, biking, and it's all long distance. So that was harder. But I think the 100-mile run was harder. They're harder than the Ironman, I have to say. because you're
What's the
out.
hardest part do you think about the Ironman? Which one, with swimming, biking, or running?
I'm a horrible swimmer. So for me to swim, I am so bad. I didn't learn how to swim until I was 26 years old, or 20. No, I was 26. I was pregnant with 25 because I was pregnant with Jacob. Around there, I don't know how old I was, but I remember I saw somebody swimming laps in a pool, and I thought, geez, I should learn how to do that. So I learned how to swim, and then I started to do triathlons and surfing, rough water swims, things like that. And then how do you take it to the next? So with me, it's always what's next? What's the next level? So I started backpacking a few years ago, which I love backpacking. And 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I backpacked across the Sierra Nevada mountains. So that was 250-mile backpacking trip. Wow. And in March, I'm going to ride my bicycle across the United States from San Diego to Florida. So I'm always setting goals for myself.
Oh my gosh.
I love it. We actually just did a podcast on goals. So that's awesome. Yes.
That is.
And you know what I love, and I firmly believe this too, is you have to push yourself both physically and mentally. And so last year I ran a half marathon, and it was again, you have to be disciplined because with your training, that's what it teaches you in order to be prepared. Similar to the work that you're doing as well, they have to put in the work, they have to stay disciplined. But when you actually accomplish what your goal is, it's a huge, almost like, okay, like you said, what's next? I can keep pushing myself. So now it's like, okay, I did a half. I'll probably do another half, and then I'm going to do a full. And then it's like, okay. Yeah. And then it's like, I'm talking to John because we went to Lightning Fitness here in Connecticut, which is like bodybuilders. They do strongman competitions. Yep. And so we were picking up Atlas stones, doing something that's completely out of our comfort zone, but we're really pushing our bodies and our minds. And so would you say when you're training for these things, it's the physical, yes, but it's more the mental game of it?
Oh, it's all mental. I think, well, of course it has to be physical because you have to be conditioned. Right. But to be out somewhere running 50 miles or doing an Ironman, how do you get yourself through it? It's the mental toughness. And that mental toughness can be used in so many different areas of your life. It really is amazing. I remember my first Ironman when I got off the bike and I'm running and I'm looking around and all these people are like vomiting on the run and their legs are seizing up. And I thought, oh my God, I got to get this over with because pretty soon I'm going to be looking like that. So that's kind of what got me through it. And, when it's so exciting running your first half marathon, running your first anything you do for the first time, crossing that finish line, that sense of accomplishment is just amazing. So,
And
now, do you incorporate? Go ahead, BG.
Sorry, go
ahead.
You know what is nice too is with events like that, you always have a support system.
Yes.
And so I had, my family come out, and they were all there supporting me, and it was a really special moment. And I'm sure you can relate to that because you have your support system there cheering you on, even when it's like, ooh, I have a little bit left in the tank. And then you see them, you're like, oh, I have a lot more in the tank. And you just kind of push through. I think that's special too.
Well, my husband stopped coming to watch me to compete because every time he watched me, something would go wrong. Like I would seize up, or he couldn't figure out why because you don't look good when you cross the finish line.
That's a good point.
If you give it your all, and you have nothing left in the tank, that means you ran your best race. And that's what I always tried to do. And he just did not like to see me in pain. He really didn't. He kept saying, I can't figure out, as I'm pushing the stop button on my watch and vomiting as I'm going across the finish line, what was my time? And he would be like, why are you doing this to yourself? So he did, but I did start to bring my older daughter, and she was really into it, and it actually got her into running as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
Great.
That's awesome.
Now, do
awesome.
you incorporate fitness and all that? Do you try to with some of your clients maybe and suggest that and say this is a good outlet?
Oh no, I always do. Depending on who they are, so in that weekly schedule will also be, exercise, 20 to 30 minutes a day or whatever it is. And also extra rewards for putting in extra time exercising. I think that, exercise is so important for your mental health. It really is. And the people who are sedentary and not getting out there in the fresh air, I know you have to go to a gym. I work out twice a week doing stuff like that, but I much prefer being out running in the rain or doing anything outdoors because I like the outdoors.
Exactly.
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
I agree with you.
Me too.
And if you could, I know we talked about Jacob earlier. Can you talk about the Jacob Run? That's an annual event, and I think it's normally in October. Is that correct?
Yes, it's in October. We just had our 36 annual.
God damn. Congratulations.
Wow. Memory lives on. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yep.
It really is amazing. Time goes by and all the money. So the money, it's interesting. So it's turned into, I've had people say, you can make this a really big event. And I said, I don't want to because it's I do everything. So why would I put more on myself? I get the food truck. We do have a band that donates their time. This year was very, very special because there's a group of special needs individuals. It's called Always on Stage. And they performed at Jacob's Run this year. They did songs from Shrek. And it was incredible.
That's amazing.
It really was incredible. It was so
That's
heartwarming.
Awesome.
And so people come and they eat, they enjoy the music, or they don't come and they donate a check. But whoever gives money, we always send them a shirt. We have shirts made, and it's I'll have to get your information. I'd love to send you guys a couple shirts.
Yeah. Oh, we'll donate.
Amazing.
We'll donate.
Yeah,
we'll donate.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome.
Because I think it's cool. These shirts are all over. They're in Costa Rica. They're in Hawaii. My friend was in Hawaii and she was wearing the shirt, and this one kid stopped her and said, "Hey, I know Jacob Singer's Run." And then they started talking and found out that they both know me, but they were awesome. In the United States. So it's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. So how can people donate? Is it when the time comes for the race and something goes up for that, or is it a year-round thing? How does that usually work?
There should be a link on my website. If they look up Laurie Singer.
Okay.
Yeah, LaurieSingerBehavioral.com. And then for my book, You'reNotCrazyBook.com, there's a link at the bottom that you can switch from one website to the next, but there actually is a link on there that you can donate to Children's Hospital. And if for some reason it doesn't work, you can always email me through my website and I can figure out how to connect you.
Awesome.
That's awesome. So, Laurie, I have one final question for you, but I also wanted to share my favorite quote in the book, which was, "You control your thoughts do not control you." I love that quote because it's very empowering.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you, Brian.
So my final question, Laurie. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Yep.
I just want to tell you that when people come to see me, that's what they don't believe. They don't believe that they control their thoughts. So getting them to believe that is so important.
Yeah, it's huge.
True.
It's huge.
Yep.
So my final question. So with 2023 just beginning, if you reflect on 2022, what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from this past year?
The biggest lessons that I've learned? That's a tough one.
Sorry. Maybe I should stop with these questions that I just throw randomly at. I always throw like a hot fire question at the very end.
Because I feel like so much happened. So much happens throughout a year. And then how do you, my grandkids are the world to me. I love my kids. But like your parents probably say about your kids, there's nothing like a grandkid. I took my grandson camping for the first time, just me and my grandson, took him to the Sierras. And these moments with my grandkids
that is amazing.
Are so special to me that I think that's what I've learned, that I have made it a point in the 2020 to spend time, that type of quality time with my grandkids.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's so. Yes, I can totally agree with that, because being present so hard sometimes, and with how busy everyone is, you forget to kind of just be present in moments. And we talked about a lot between the two of us, Brian and I, about really focusing on being present in a lot of, like, not even just like when it's an occasion, right? It doesn't need to be an occasion to be present in a moment. So that's something that I think a lot of people can do better and work on it with themselves. And I have heard that the grandkids are a little different. My mom's favorite quote is, "You're at grandma's house, you can have whatever you want." That's just it. Can we have a popsicle at 10 a.m.? You're at grandma's house, you can have whatever you want. It's just, that's how it is. Grandma's are the best.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
My daughter got me a shirt and it says, "You can't tell me what to do. You're not my grandkids."
It's awesome.
It is. Awesome. It's true. It's absolutely true.
And Laurie, this has been a great episode. I hope a lot of people took a lot from this. I'm sure they learned a lot, which is awesome, and can apply some of the methods that you talked about today to their lives to improve upon, whether it be depression, anxiety, or maybe a disorder, and they can actually maybe go seek some help as well. Laurie, this has been amazing. We thank you for your time today.
I had such a great time with you guys. I'm so glad we got everything worked out technically.
Absolutely.
Our technical difficulties before recording, guys, that you don't hear every week. So yeah, we overcame them and delivered on a pretty badass episode. So thank you guys so much. And Laurie, thank you. This was awesome. Thank you so much. You made us a hell of a lot smarter in an hour and 6 minutes. So thank you very much.
Okay. Enjoy life, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You as well.